Hello everyone, I am Carius and today we're going to be talking about the Breacher. So the Breacher represents a bit of a holy grail for me. For a long time in the Nerf hobby, there just hasn't been a decent tube-fed, shell-ejecting shotgun that fires multiple darts at once. We've gotten close, we've got sad excuses for that kind of blaster. As far as official blasters go, we've got shotguns that use shells and eject the shells and have the form factor of something that should hold multiple shells but only shoots one, because why would Nerf do something cool? This is literally just this with extra steps. And we've even had plenty of tube-fed blasters shooting everything from Rival to Vortex that have the functionality of a tube shotgun, some better than others. But none of those are using shells. They're just singular rounds at a time. And some of them don't even give you the option to reload the blaster while the blaster is still ready to fire. You still have to prime it in order to insert more ammo. Like on the Liberator, you got to actually prime it back to be able to get to the loading port, which defeats the whole point of a system like this. And then we had the Spring Thunder, which was a good try. But it's a nightmare to put together. It's kind of underpowered. And the shells... well, I can't find any of my Spring Thunder shells, because I gave up on them a long time ago. But those max out at 2 darts side by side in a shell. You can put 4 half darts in one of those, but the blaster barely has enough power to send those a decent distance, and that's assuming you even get the blaster working in the first place, because it's kind of a nightmare to put together and tune and get working reliably. It was a little before its time, and using a shell standard that hopefully everybody's going to completely forget about now that silly shells are a thing. This blaster is going to be staying on my wall. It barely works anyway, and don't even get me started on the Colonel Wasp or whatever nonsense that use tiny shells that only shoot multiple darts if you're using 50 caliber foam balls. That's just not good enough, and some clubs don't even let you use these because they get everywhere and they're hard to pick up, and you're just kind of almost playing airsoft at that point. No, what we all wanted was something that is similar to the sledge fire shell in size and form factor, that is just a tube-fed shotgun, like a real shotgun. And finally we have it with the Breacher and silly shells, and I'm super excited about it. I think it's a really good design. I'm super thrilled with how mine's performing so far, and let's take a look at it. I have no idea what Nerf was thinking with this nonsense. Like, you already had shells, and now let's make them twice the size and chunky for no reason. Yeah, I don't get it. They've got these notches that might help with ejection, but then the Sledgefire shell has these ridges too that would work just fine. You could make a tube-fed Sledgefire shell blaster, but Nerf just abandoned this after one blaster and decided to make these funky things, and then didn't do anything cool with these either, so fine, we'll do it ourselves. So the Breacher is a tube-fed shotgun that works like a standard shotgun would, in that you have your shells, in this case silly shells. I like these angled 3x elite shells that Zafk designed that are on printables. And you can load up the tube. Mine has the extended front on it, so this will hold up to 6 in the tube, plus 1 in the chamber gives you 7. If you're really good at it, you can do this, the double shell load that I'm still kind of practicing. It's not, there we go, that I'm not great at yet, but you've got your tube full of shells, and as long as you've got your lifter adjusted correctly, it is super smooth to rack the next shell into position, fire it, and then eject, and the next shell is ready to go, like so. Silly clearly put a lot of effort into making sure this whole action was really robust and smooth, because, I mean, that was the problem with the Spring Thunder, is that it's just a very complicated mechanism to get working right, and the Spring Thunder is really crunchy, and it felt super easy to just break everything if you primed it a little too hard when it didn't want to cooperate with you. Whereas the Breacher, I don't feel like this is ever having trouble. Like, it's never struggling. It's just extremely smooth and well designed. I'm super happy with it. And unlike previous attempts at this kind of platform, there's no weird custom hardware that someone would have to make in a machine shop almost. The Spring Thunder relied on metal bars with notches and slots kind of cut into them so that they would facilitate the mechanism that actually indexes the shells. But the breacher uses a 3D printed bar that is beefy enough to actually prime the blaster and has the right notches to then let the shell indexers move as they're supposed to and the sled push the next shell up. So you can see you have these two shell stops and the lifter. Go ahead and load a shell. And as you are, well, let's load two shells actually, so I can illustrate a point. So as you prime it back, this first shell stop moves out of the way to let this shell forward a little bit so that now it's ready to be grabbed by the lifter as soon as this shell stop gets out of the way. Then the lifter goes up and the second shell stop moves. But at this point, the first shell stop is tensioned so that it will stop the next shell in the tube as this shell goes into the chamber and falls out the side because the blaster's upside down. And then everything loads and is ready to eject the shell, assuming the shell didn't fall out the side, which it won't do if the blaster's not upside down. If I tilt it like this, then there we go. So now that's loaded and it ejects. So my breacher, as you can see, is a rainbow. I actually bought a pack of filament that had these 7 colors plus white, which I didn't actually end up needing, but it had these tiny spools that look like this that each have 1/4 of a kilogram of filament. You can see the red I almost ran out of because I have red on either side here, but I had just enough filament to comfortably make each section of the blaster in a different color without having to buy entire kilogram spools of each color. So that was convenient. And of course I had my PLA Plus black and orange for all the functional bits to make sure it's as strong as possible. And I made the logo here match the colorway of the blaster, which is really cool. There's a file on printables that's just the letters, so you can print them separately and insert them into the breacher plate here, and I just printed all the letters separately in different colors. I think it turned out really cool. So building this blaster was pretty straightforward. I was actually pleasantly surprised. The build guide is extremely thorough. You could even say it's too thorough for anyone who's more experienced at building blasters. Like, Silly really wants to make sure that you are doing every single little tiny step in between everything, and it's perfect for somebody who really has little experience building blasters or making things like this, but it can be a little tedious for people who are more experienced. There's about 250 pages in that build guide, and if Silly Butts was designing the guide for somebody who'd built a blaster before, it could probably be 50 or less pages. But he's trying to make sure that anybody could build this blaster. I didn't really have any issues in the build that were a problem with the blaster's design. It's a little finicky to get the heat set inserts that are on slopes to be the right angle. You got to be really careful with, I think there are 2 up here and a couple more throughout the blaster, and you've got to make them parallel to the blaster, but they're being set into a diagonal surface. So if you screw that up, you're kind of messed up apart. You might have to reheat it and try to reset it if you're lucky enough for that to actually work. The threaded rods were a bit of a mess, and that's not really Silly's fault. Like, threaded rods in general are going to be a bit of a pain ordering hardware kits from people. Out of Darts tries to clean up the ends of the rods, but just doing kind of a chamfer cut on the end of the threaded rod does not make it so that the rod's going to thread into a nut easily. And when you're threading the steel threaded rods into the brass heat set inserts, you end up with even more trouble. So what I would recommend, this build or any build that uses threaded rods, before you go to put them in the blaster, you take your threaded rod, and this one's probably got clean threads on the end because it's just a clean rod, but what you're going to want to do, and this works especially for the breacher because it doesn't matter how clean your threads are down the whole rod, it's just the ends that matter. So you can take whatever nasty pliers or whatever will actually hold on to it, clamp that threaded rod in place, and then get your wrench or your screwdriver with a socket on it or anything, force a nut onto the threaded rod from the end while it's outside the blaster and while there's nothing for you to cross thread or get screwed up. And you can basically carve the threads back onto the end of the threaded rod. If you're really struggling, and this might be even harder if you've already kind of chewed up the middle of the rod, the last resort would be to thread it to the other side and then screw it all the way down, and then take your wrench, force it the last few threads off, and that will carve the threads into the very end of the rod also. You can kind of take a Dremel to it and try to carve the threads out yourself, but the easiest way I found is to just force a steel nut of the right size, which the breacher comes with a few that are used in the blaster, so you can use one of those, and just force the threads on with some pliers and like a wrench, and make sure it threads cleanly onto the end on both sides of the threaded rod before you start using it in the build, and then you'll be fine. At that point, there's nothing else in the build that's going to be a huge problem for you. I had one problem at the front of the blaster where we've got these 2 screws on either side, and the ones in the build guide, or that came with the hardware kit, were too long. They wouldn't thread all the way in. And I don't know if that's an issue because I printed my buddy Gray's greebled front end, and maybe it's missing like a hole or something that would go behind the nut here, but there wasn't actually enough room for the screws, and I actually had to grab some shorter screws that I had from a little M3 screw assortment, and then those worked fine, but ones that came with the hardware kit were way too long and would not go in all the way, so I couldn't attach the front here. So I don't know if that's an issue with the parts I printed that's been updated, or if it's an issue with the build guide and the hardware kit. The lifter adjustment can be a little bit of a pain, only because every time you've tested the lifter and realized it's in the wrong place, you've got to then remove the screw and take the lifter out and then change it and then put it in and put everything back together and then try it again, and then if it doesn't work, like, there's no way to get to the lifter screws while it's in the blaster, so every time you want to adjust it, you've got to take the whole thing out, which is a little annoying, but once you've got it in the right place, it works really well. And the only other thing I've noticed, on mine, when you cycle the breacher, you've got a shell in there, right? And you've got this last little bit of travel at the very front where the shell catch is actually grabbing onto the shell, like so. And mine was really hard to do that reliably. Like, when you're just pumping it and trying to like fire the blaster, you would sometimes not actually get it all the way forward, and then the shell is not sealed against the plunger, and so you're not even shooting, you're basically dry firing, and then the shell won't properly eject because it's not grabbed by the shell catch. And that was because the 2 heavy springs in the ejector were just super heavy, and I had to slam the thing forward in order to grab the shell. So you would think just use lighter springs there, but if I use the weak springs that come with the hardware kit instead of the strong ones, then the ejection's really unreliable. Like, it doesn't have enough of a pop to get it out of the chamber, and sometimes you end up with shells that just stay in and then jam up the whole thing. So what I ended up doing, actually, that's like the worst angle for me to try to eject a shell is, there we go. So what I ended up actually doing, let's see if you can see this, is I put 1 strong spring and 1 weak spring in the ejector, and it made an immediately noticeable change in how easy it was to engage that shell at the front of the priming stroke while still being strong enough to properly eject the shell. So if you're noticing that the springs on the shell catch are just a little too tough, you can try 1 weak and 1 heavy, and I believe the hardware kit has a bunch of extra springs in it. Mine did, at least. So I was able to just take one of the heavy springs out and replace it with a weak one. And it's kind of a pain to get this open and get to this and take it out. You have to take the whole back off and take all these pieces out and then get to here. But if you're dexterous with some pliers and flathead screwdrivers, you can actually rip the springs out straight from here without opening the blaster, and then carefully sandwich a new spring back in. Especially if you're replacing a heavy one with a weak one, because the weak ones are a little easier to navigate. The second time I adjusted this, I just tried to do it without opening the blaster, and I was able to get these springs in there without opening everything up. So that's possible. It's not easy, but it's possible. And the only other thing I'm having trouble with on mine is the catch is a little bit stiff. Like, the trigger feels really chunky. And I think that is a unique problem to my breacher because I printed everything on a textured bed. So the catch has a textured surface rubbing up against the inside here. And I think I can probably fix that problem just by sanding that down. And the blaster works fine. It's just the trigger's a lot chunkier than I would like. It almost feels like the shellfish, where you're like almost flexing the plastic of the trigger to fire it. And I think that's an easy fix for mine. And it's probably not even an issue that most people are going to have in their breacher. And my only other critique of the blaster is the match saver piece. It's kind of useless. It holds onto shells so hard that it's not going to be a fast reload to grab your shell and put it in when you're trying to get that last second extra shell in, because this thing has got a death grip on the shell. It won't slide back and forth. You have to grab it from the front and pry it out. And that is after me sanding and lubricating this thing. It was even worse before I did that. So now I can kind of like slide the shell in this far, and then it's easy to grab and get out. But before, like, you snap that shell in and there's no getting it out in a fast manner. So it was just like, what even is the point of that? The part that you print for this needs to be way looser. I don't know if that's something that they're already looking at and changing, but the one I printed, basically useless because of how much of a death grip it has on these shells. Of course, mine has this, knock the camera. So mine has this extended magazine tube that adds an extra tube capacity. But if you don't want the blaster to be that much longer and have that sticking out, you can very easily swap to the stock little cap piece here. And now your capacity is 4 shells in the tube, plus one in the chamber. And it's just extremely easy and convenient to swap between the two. So I like that a lot. I like having 6 plus 1. I don't think it's enough longer to really be a problem for me. I could see where someone would want it to be just a little bit more maneuverable if they were like running in a CQC arena or something. So I have recently gone a little bit silly shell crazy. This is the 3rd primary silly shell blaster that I've built in the past month or so, and it's not counting any of the pistols I showed off. And I got that bandolier, which I have subsequently dumped a whole roll of filament into making. There's 30 in this bandolier, but I have 48 of these angled 3-shot shells. And aside from the shellfish, the other silly shell blaster I've got is the battle axe, which is another fantastic blaster from Silly Butts. And comparing the two has been an interesting exercise. Mine has a shell catcher on it, which is one thing that I wouldn't want to put on the breacher just because it blocks the breech, whereas on a battle axe, you can still put shells in the magazine and have the shell catch on to catch them as they eject, just because of the geometry of everything. Well, the battle axe is actually a pretty cool little blaster, and I don't think the breacher makes it totally obsolete. So the battle axe is lighter, more maneuverable. The prime is a little easier, even though it's got the same power as the breacher, and it's got the same capacity, or even more if you like print a giant crazy mag. And it has the aforementioned ability to have a shell catcher and still be able to get into the breech. And it's much lighter. Like the breacher is a heavy blaster. It's a big chunky blaster. Battle axe can be a little front heavy because of the magazine, but it's not nearly as heavy as the breacher. It also doesn't have a foot of extra barrel beyond the shell. Because the battle axe is locking the shell in right here in front of the barrel, shells that have a wider spread, like actually these 3-round shells that I'm using, are going to perform a little bit better because you're not going to be hitting the barrel on the way out. So the breacher struggles a little bit with wider spread shells. It'll still shoot them just fine. It's just you'll notice a slight performance hit compared to like a battle axe. But where the breacher beats the battle axe, of course, is that you can reload the breacher without priming the breacher. You can reload the breacher while it's ready to fire. You can reload it while you're running around. It's super smooth. Whereas the battle axe, in order to reload it, you gotta prime it back, and the blaster is currently not able to fire. So you are totally in reload mode. You also, every time you want to reload, if you happen to have a loaded shell in here that you haven't fired yet, you can't get into the magazine easily and add more without ejecting a fully loaded shell, which is a little annoying. So that one feature of being able to reload the breacher basically at any time while the blaster's still ready to fire makes all the difference. It's why we've wanted a tube-fed shotgun for so long, and now we finally have it. And because you've got so much barrel up front, there's not really a perfect shell for the breacher yet, in my opinion. Like, there's a bunch of different 3-shot shells available. We've got Zaft's angled 3-shot, and this is the one that I've printed a lot of that I like a lot. But the spread on this is a little wide, and you are definitely hitting the inside of the barrel on the way out. Then you've got the stock silly shell that you can do the 6 darts in, but you got a little bit of an air leak going through the center, and there's a noticeable decrease in power on this shell compared to some of these other shell designs. Someone else has made an Elite 3X narrow spread shell, and this one works alright, but the design of it causes standard nozzle printers to give you these holes. See if the camera will focus. Yeah, right where the dart goes, you end up with holes because the wall is so thin at the back here, so you get a little bit of a power decrease because of that too, which is annoying. And then you have my favorite shells to use in the Yeet Hammer, which is another separate chamber 3-barrel shell, but this one avoids the issue with the back being too thin by pushing everything a little bit forward. And what that means is that the darts actually peek out the front a little bit, which means this no longer works in magazines, including the breacher's tube. It jams up the lifter if you've got something sticking out the front of the shell. Same with the battle axe, you don't have room for extra stuff here. So this works really well in like a yeet hammer or a different single shot silly shell blaster, but doesn't work in this, even though if you breech load these into the breacher, you'll get the best performance out of any of these. But because the darts are sticking out just a little bit out the front, you can't put them in the tube. So we've got a bunch of good but not great 3-shot shells available now, and I'm waiting for somebody to make a perfect one for the breacher that combines all the advantages of all these. And I'm sure somebody will do it. Let's see, the spread actually goes from wider to narrower on these three. And I found that this is the most consistent print. It works really well, and it has that wider spread that works fantastic in the battle axe, and is just a little janky out of the breacher, but still works good enough that I've printed a bunch of these and I'm going to use them in the breacher. Something like this with a little bit less spread would be perfect. And of course, since it's a silly shell blaster, you have so many different options of what to actually fire. Like, you can do Mega XL. You have to do cut down Mega XL or it won't work in the magazine, but you can load a full length Mega XL and breech load it and that'll work. You've got 1 dart or 2 half darts. You got 2 darts or 4 half darts. You got your normal 3s that I showed you earlier. You've got 4 or 8 half darts, which is asking a little much of the breacher. 4 elite darts out of this shell work pretty well, but 8 half darts is where you just kind of fart a bunch of darts out of the barrel. Like, you could hit somebody 20 feet away, maybe, but you're not going to get this kind of performance you get out of the 3-shotters. You got stuff like Zach's 4-shot angled shell, and this is also asking a bit much. It works a little better than that one, but it's still going to be 8 half darts, and the extra spread means it's hitting the barrel all over the place, so it's also just kind of a 20-foot plop of darts. And then you got Rival and Mega, and all kinds of other weird combinations that people have made on printables. There are shells that are optimized to shoot the little 50 caliber foam balls, and you could probably shoot like 18 of those out of the breacher, but that's assuming your club allows those. There's even shells for Ultra and like N-series darts, and here's a 4-shot Boomco shell of all things. It doesn't work great, but it exists. And you could probably do a sniper shell type thing. So yeah, that's the breacher. See, mine also has this side saddle thing that'll hold another 8 shells and is spaced them out so that you can grab them 2 at a time and try to do that tactical reload thing. But I'm still practicing like that, so you can grab 2 shells pretty easily. From what I've been able to figure out, you've got to grab them so that your thumb can go on the very back of the back shell, and then you can kind of do that. There you go. So you can do that. And there's a bunch of different options for adding sling points and extra rails and stuff to every section of this blaster. Silly Butts has included a bunch of different things that you can add. I probably should have done a sling point on mine, but I don't ever plan on using this as a secondary. It's like a big beefy blaster. I don't know why I would sling anything, and I'm just bad at using multiple blasters at once anyway, so I'm not going to need it, but having the option would have been nice, so I do kind of wish I'd done that. But there's options to add rails to the side and sling points all the way down the blaster, and people have already made all kinds of different silly shell holders that you can attach to this tack rail. And the front priming grip has a few different options. You can have a smaller one that then has Picatinny rail on it, and then you can add a vertical grip to it if you prefer that. I'm kind of surprised that nobody has made a version of the cheek rest part that then just goes down to the side and adds more shell holders. That seems like a no-brainer that somebody will probably put together, because I would add that to mine in a heartbeat on the side where my cheek's not going. So you just add more shells to the side here without having to have the Picatinny rail and then the thing sticking out even farther. Although maybe that'll be a little flimsy, I'm not sure. Because as you're pulling the shells out, it might be flexing this and then trying to break it off. And for my arm length and height, I would like the stock to go out a little farther. Just having a longer stock would be nice, but its current configuration is good enough. It's still fairly comfortable. It just feels a little bit short for me, but it's probably going to be perfectly fine for most people. So how about that Sobek? I wonder what happened to that guy. He was like, I'm going to make a bigger Spring Thunder that uses shells that can hold up to 4 darts in them, and it's basically what the breacher turned out to be, but it seemed like he was too much of a perfectionist and just was never happy with it, and then he just kind of dropped off the face of the planet. And I've seen a few Sobek prototypes out in the wild, and they seem like really good shotguns that work pretty well, but the breacher happened first. And with silly shells just becoming such a widespread kind of standard for shells like this, he might have had to redesign the Sobek anyway just to use silly shells. So I wonder if the Sobek will ever come out. The guy will come back out of nowhere and release that, but seems like that's dead, and now we've finally got what the Sobek should have been. Anyway, I'm gonna stop rambling. Let's shoot some stuff. Okay, I've got a variety of shells ready to test out different FPSs. I've got 1 through 4 of the standard silly shells loaded with elite darts, 1, 2, 3, 4, and then half darts, 2, 4, 6, 8. Got a Mega XL shell, Mega Dart, and Rivals. And I have one of my favorite angled ×3 shell loaded with standard worker darts. All the half darts are those standard 1 gram worker darts, so I can get a good comparison. I'm going to start with the elite darts. One elite dart, 91. 2 elite darts, 101. So this is what you're going to see a lot with silly shells in the breacher. There's kind of a sweet spot in between where the 1 dart shells are wasting a lot of power. Now 3 elites, we're back to 90. So that's a pretty good sweet spot. And now 4 elites, we're at 80. And 80 with 4 darts is pretty good still. But I think the best bang for your buck for just shooting elite darts, if you're wanting like a crazy spread where you have no idea where the darts are going to go, it's going to be the 3 shot. One thing I've really noticed testing silly shells in the basement here is that PLA Plus is really bouncy on concrete. Because these shells are going all kinds of random places once they hit the floor. But at least they're not breaking. I'm not going to be able to continue the video until I find my shells. Finally found it. The shell had bounced in the opposite direction it was ejected and was buried behind a bunch of stuff. Back to testing. Okay, now we're going to do half darts. 2, 4, 6, and 8 half darts in the standard silly shells. Here's 2, 98. Here's 4, 86, 6, 75. That's not bad for 6 darts. 8, 61. I mean, 61 is like a stock Nerf blaster, kind of a weaker one, but you can definitely feel them just kind of plopping out the barrel. Again, it definitely feels like you're wanting to do 4 or 6. But then if we take the angled 3, this is with 6 half darts. Now we're at 83. With 6 darts, that's pretty good. That's why I printed 48 of those shells. I've just noticed that you'll always see 1 or 2 darts that kind of barely fall out of the barrel because they've hit the barrel on the way out and they're like falling out sideways as they get shot. And with the battle axe, you don't have that. Now we got Rival, 3 of them. 100 FPS with Rival. Now that is the blue Rival balls out of the adjusted boomstick shells that you can find on printables. It's about the best Rival shells, and it works all right. I would rather shoot darts. Now we have a Mega AccuStrike dart. Almost said AccuFake, and because that's sticking out, I've got to breech load it. 93 with a Mega Dart, it's pretty good. And then now we have Mega XL. Also, definitely have to breech load that. 62. That's decent. You probably get a little bit more FPS out of a smooth shell, because this is the rifled shell, and out of a cut down MXL dart. You might have better luck. You gotta shoot the rainbow cups with the rainbow blaster. Got my breacher fully loaded. Got 16 shells. So we've got 6 in the tube, 1 in the chamber, 1 on the match saver, another 8 in the shell caddy on the side. Each shell is 6 half darts. So I think that's a total of 96 darts. So we're gonna see how much of this table I can clear off with 16 shells. And I'm gonna try to reload as fast as I can, see what results I get there. Okay. Oh. What the hell? My second shell popped up. Oh, we're gonna redo that. I've never had that happen. When I racked it, my second shell popped up from the lifter and popped directly out of the breech. And then when I fired the second time, there was nothing in it because the shell had already left. And I looked on the floor to see 2 shells that had ejected. That's a weird issue. Hopefully that's a once in a million occurrence. We'll reset and try again. Okay, attempt number 2. Oh, it happened again. Why? I just ejected a shell that wasn't fired as soon as I pulled it back. That's so weird. Okay, we're gonna keep going. Okay, no issues so far. That's pretty smooth. I've got 2 shells left. Cool. So I cleared the table, but twice I had a shell go straight from the tube to out of the blaster as I was priming it. And I have no idea why. That doesn't make any sense. I'm gonna mess around with this a little bit more and investigate that. Alright, so I have no idea what that issue was. I just put another couple dozen rounds through it and didn't see it once, so either I'm cursed and it only happens on camera, or what. Something weird's going on. But in a couple weeks I'm going to be taking this to the ABC war and running it all day. So after that event I will add a pinned comment to this video letting you guys know if I encountered that issue while actually running it in the field, because that was bizarre and now I can't seem to reproduce it. So I don't know what's going on. I don't even know if the shell was coming out the bottom of the breacher or out the breech, but it was just ejecting a fully loaded shell alongside the regular shell that was being ejected. And it happened twice, and now I can't get it to happen again. But for the most part, it works really good. So I'll let you know how it works as I'm running a couple hundred shells through it over the course of an ABC war. And we'll see how that works. But anyway, thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed this look at the breacher. I freaking love it. It's such a great blaster. Hopefully that weird issue was just a fluke. Well, we'll see what happens. I will see you in the next video, and until then, this has been Carius reminding you to have fun. And if you're in the Southeast United States, check out the Atlanta Blaster Club. We didn't set up this bed for you. Or you. Meow? Okay, I give you love. You're lucky the guest isn't here, or you'd have to move.